Have you ever opened your phone first thing in the morning, not to check the time, not to reply to anything important, but just because you didn't want to be alone with your own thoughts for even 30 seconds? Or maybe you've caught yourself midway through a conversation, realizing your mind is somewhere else entirely. You're nodding, you're making the right sounds, but you're not actually there. Or perhaps it's simpler than that. You just feel off. Not broken, not in crisis, just quietly, persistently off. Like something subtle is wrong and you can't name it, and because you can't name it, you tell yourself it doesn't count. If any of that resonates with you, stay with this. Because what you're about to hear isn't a list of tips. It's something closer to an explanation. And sometimes understanding why you feel the way you feel is the most relieving thing in the world. Here's what most people do when they feel this way. They push through. They get busy. They convince themselves that everyone feels like this, that this is just what adulthood feels like, that if they could just sleep better, or exercise more, or eat cleaner, the feeling would go away. And sometimes it does go away, for a few hours, and then it comes back. This isn't about laziness, it isn't about weakness, and it certainly isn't a character flaw. What's happening beneath the surface is something far more complex than any of those explanations could account for. Your mind is doing something very specific, and once you understand what it is, you can't unsee it. The discomfort you feel isn't a sign that something is fundamentally wrong with you. It's a signal, and there's a crucial difference between those two things. There is a concept in psychology called emotional suppression. It's not the same as being calm, and it's not the same as being strong. Emotional suppression is what happens when a person consistently pushes feelings down before they are ever fully processed. The feelings don't disappear. That's the thing most people misunderstand. They go somewhere. They get stored in the body, in low-level anxiety and irritability that feels disproportionate, and a kind of exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix. Researchers have spent decades studying what happens to people who suppress their emotions chronically. The results are consistent. Suppression doesn't reduce the intensity of an emotion. It amplifies the body's physiological response to it. Your heart rate still rises. Your cortisol still spikes. You just don't let yourself feel it consciously, so you walk around carrying a weight you're not allowed to name. And eventually, that becomes your baseline. You forget what it felt like not to carry it. Psychology calls this emotional load. And when it gets heavy enough, it starts showing up in ways that look like personality traits rather than symptoms. You become someone who is easily overwhelmed, someone who can't concentrate, someone who cries at small things and feels nothing at large ones, someone who is perpetually tired without a clear reason. None of that is who you are. It's what happens when your nervous system has been quietly working overtime for a very long time. Imagine this. You're walking through a house that has a slow leak somewhere in the walls. You can't see it, you can't hear it. But over months, the foundation starts to shift. Doors don't close quite right. There are cracks in places that didn't used to have cracks, and everyone who visits says, "This house looks fine to me." But you live there. You notice the subtle wrongness that no one else can point to. That's what chronic emotional suppression does to the interior of a person. The exterior can look completely functional. You go to work, you answer messages, you make plans. But inside, something is slowly, quietly eroding. And the difficulty is that it happens so gradually that you normalize it. You start to think this is just what you're like, that this is just who you are now. It isn't. And this is important. It is absolutely not who you are. Here is the first thing worth understanding. Your brain has a system designed specifically to keep you safe. It's called the threat detection system, and its headquarters is a small almond-shaped structure in the brain called the amygdala. The amygdala is ancient. It evolved long before language, long before rational thought. Its entire job is to scan for danger and respond fast. When it detects a threat, whether physical, social, or emotional, it sends your body into a state of high alert, heart rate up, breathing shallow, attention narrowed. Here's the problem. The amygdala doesn't distinguish very well between a predator in the forest and a difficult conversation at work, between a physical threat and a social rejection, between a genuine crisis and a moment of uncertainty about your future. When you have spent years in environments that were emotionally unsafe, whether that was a chaotic home, a critical parent, a school where vulnerability was punished, or any situation where you learned that having feelings created problems, your amygdala gets trained into a particular pattern. It starts detecting threat everywhere because everywhere used to contain it. This is called amygdala sensitization, and it means your nervous system is running a program it wrote years ago, in a context that no longer exists, in circumstances that have long since changed. But the program keeps running, because no one taught it to stop. Here's the second thing. Your brain runs on patterns, not on reality. This is one of the most disorienting things neuroscience has revealed in the last few decades. Your brain doesn't experience the world as it is. It constructs an experience based on what it expects. Psychologists call this predictive processing. Your brain is constantly making predictions about what is about to happen, based entirely on what has happened before. When those predictions are confirmed, you feel calm. When they're violated, even in a good way, you feel unsettled. This is why change is hard, even when the change is good. It's why you can intellectually know that you're safe and still feel unsafe. It's why someone can leave a toxic relationship and feel an irrational pull to go back, not because that relationship was good, but because it was familiar. And familiar registers to the brain as safe, regardless of whether it actually was. Your discomfort isn't irrational. It's your brain doing exactly what it was built to do. Protect you by making the world predictable. The problem is that the predictions were formed in painful conditions, and those conditions have shaped what your brain expects from life, from people, from yourself. Think about this. Most people who feel chronically not okay have a very specific relationship with stillness. They can't tolerate it. The moment things go quiet, the moment there's no task, no distraction, no one to take care of, something rises up. A formless unease, a restlessness, a need to reach for the phone, to turn on something in the background, to find something to do. This isn't a personal failing. This is avoidance, and avoidance is one of the most sophisticated psychological defense mechanisms that exists. It isn't weakness. It's actually a form of intelligence that developed in service of survival. At some point, stillness meant sitting with things that were too much to sit with. So your mind learned to stay in motion. The tragedy is that motion prevents processing, and what doesn't get processed doesn't get released. It just gets postponed, and the backlog grows. Here is the third thing, and this one is subtle but important. There is a phenomenon called alexithymia. It's a term that describes a difficulty in identifying and describing one's own feelings. It's more common than most people realize. Studies suggest that a significant portion of the general population experiences some degree of it. And it doesn't mean you don't feel things. It means you feel things intensely but can't access the language or the awareness to name them. So when someone asks how you're doing, you say fine, even when you're not because you're being dishonest, but because you genuinely don't have access to what's happening below the surface. The feeling is there. The awareness of it isn't. This is often the result of growing up in an environment where emotions weren't discussed, weren't welcome, or weren't modeled, where the adults around you either overwhelmed you with their own emotional chaos or shut emotions down entirely. You learned not to look inward because looking inward was either painful or pointless. So you stopped, and now, years later, you're living a life that feels vaguely disconnected from itself, like you're watching your own days from a slight distance, like things happen to you and around you, but you're not quite fully present in any of it. This disconnection has a name, too. It's called dissociation at its clinical extreme, and depersonalization in its milder form. And in its mildest, most common form, it's just the feeling of going through the motions, of being there without being there. Now here is the fourth thing, and this is where many people feel the most alone. The belief that you are the only one who feels this way. Social media has created an extraordinary illusion. Everyone else appears to be doing well. Thriving, even. Their lives seem full and purposeful and beautiful from the outside. And you sit there looking at your own life, which looks fine from the outside, and wonder why you can't feel that way on the inside. There's a concept called pluralistic ignorance, It describes a situation where a group of people each privately feel a certain way, but each believes everyone else feels differently. So no one says anything. Everyone performs okay because they believe they're the only one who isn't. The result is a culture of hidden suffering. Everyone is managing in private. Everyone is just beneath the surface of something they're not saying out loud. And because no one says it, everyone believes they are uniquely broken. You are not uniquely broken. You are quietly, collectively, in the company of enormous numbers of people who feel exactly the way you feel and have never had the language or the space to say so. The fifth thing is about identity, and this is perhaps the most quietly devastating effect of long-term emotional suppression. Over time, when you spend years managing how you appear, performing fine, suppressing what's real, you start to lose the thread back to who you actually are. You become very good at knowing what other people need from you. You become less and less sure what you need. Your preferences fade. Your desires become unclear. What you want starts to feel irrelevant compared to what's expected or required. Psychology calls this loss of authentic self. It's not that the self disappears, it's that it gets buried beneath layers of performance, adaptation, and self-protection. And the longer it stays buried, the more unfamiliar it becomes. This is why some people, when they start doing therapeutic work or journaling or simply getting quiet for long enough, cry without knowing why. The self is still there. It's just been unseen for so long that being seen is overwhelming. Here is the deep insight of all of this. The problem is not that you are not okay. The problem is that you were trained to make your not okay invisible, even to yourself. Every coping mechanism you developed, the busyness, the scrolling, the helping everyone else, the performance of composure, those were intelligent adaptations to difficult circumstances. They kept you functional. They helped you survive the things you needed to survive. But you are not in those circumstances anymore. You're carrying armor into rooms where you're no longer at war. And the armor is heavy. And you've worn it so long you've forgotten it isn't skin. Your exhaustion isn't weakness. It's what happens when you spend years working harder than anyone around you knows. Harder than you yourself have acknowledged. The emotional labor of managing a mind that is always monitoring, always anticipating, always preparing for something that mostly doesn't come anymore. That's real work. Invisible work. And it costs something. You are not someone who can't handle their emotions. You are someone who has never given a safe enough space to learn how. You are not someone who is falling apart. You are someone whose defenses are so good that the falling apart has been quietly, skillfully postponed for years. You are not broken. You are a person who learned to survive. And survival took everything you had. And now you're here, on the other side of what needed surviving, and the coping mechanisms that carried you through are starting to cost more than they're worth. That isn't failure. That is the beginning of something. Here's what this all moves toward. Not a cure, not a transformation in 30 days, just recognition. The recognition that what you feel is real even when it's nameless. That the quietness inside you isn't emptiness. It's unexplored territory. That the people who seem okay are often managing the same things in private. That the path forward doesn't require you to be louder or stronger or more disciplined or more motivated. It requires you to be more honest. First with yourself. Slowly, carefully, on your own terms. You don't have to figure everything out. You don't have to fix it all at once. You just have to stop pretending that nothing needs looking at. Because something does. And you already know that. That's why you're here. That's why you watch this. Before you go, here's something to sit with. If you were to describe honestly, not to anyone else, just to yourself, one thing that has felt not okay for a long time, what would that be? Not the version you tell people when they ask how you are. The real version. The one you think about at night. Write it in the comments if you want to. Or just hold it for a moment. Because naming a thing, even quietly, even alone, is the beginning of something. And this channel, Mind Beneath, will always be a space for that kind of honesty.